So for the eyes, you're gonna put just like the eyeball, the bulge of the eyeball in there. If you had done full sockets, you could make a full eyeball, but you didn't, so you're going to just make it kind of bulge across there. Don't worry about much of the eyelid, but if you've gone and like hollowed underneath here, go ahead and fill in some of that so that it's the right general shape to go across there. It's going to be your next step. And then do that on both eyes. And then to do the eyelids, there's a couple different ways of doing it. One is the same way that we do the lips on the mouth. So I will show you how to do those next because it's easier to see what I'm doing with the lips. And then we'll go back into the eyes and get those finished up. So, and hopefully I'll do a couple of different eye demos, one on each eye, have them so you can see a couple different techniques. For the upper lip, remember we want this to be arched across where the skull arches up right here. So the lip is going across that, so we don't want this flat when you're adding it. If your lip area is flat, then you can either add some clay to round it, or you would make a much thicker upper lip. And I think it's easier to get it the right shape underneath. But the upper lip, when I initially put it on there, looks a bit like a mustache. And it's gonna, so you're making a tapered coil that fades off. Onto the sides, and you're gonna smush, and here if you wanted to make sure that it's all gonna stay attached because you're keeping it, then you'd slip and score in here, or if yours is getting dry, then just to make it smooth nicely, you'll do the same. But eesh, now that I just did that, I kind of messed with the shape here. Most things that are wrong with the upper lip, when you put it on, it's easier to, a lot of times it's easier to just pull it off and redo it until you get it right. So remember, relaxed neutral position mouth is actually going to be downturned just a little bit, and then you're going to squish this part up into that area, this little up into the septum, and you know, slide it up into the nostrils and up into the nasolabial folds, and then you give it a little bit of an edge. Yeah, just trade your phone for the hall pass. If you can wait until I'm done with this part here, that would be good so that you see what you're supposed to be doing next. We're gonna go in here, and then you make the little Cupid's bow thing, where those, you got the little divot in the lips, and the top edge of your upper lip tends to be kind of sharpish, and man, it's a little bit, this keeps being all lopsided. My nose is on crooked and keeps throwing off a lot of other things that I'm doing, which, to be fair, my actual nose is on crooked too, so it should be, I should be able to make it work anyway. So I'm going across there and sliding up into there, and often you'll add the nasolabial folds after you finish blending out the mouth. It's a little bit easier that way, but it's helpful to show where they blend to and what ends them, so I put those on beforehand. One during the demo and one in between. So there's that, and then for the lower lip, is usually more full, kind of like puffy, meaty, whatever. But it's as it wraps around here, it kind of disappears sooner. So it's actually a lot shorter. Even though it's the fatter lip, you use a smaller coil, and you can just kind of get it, the rounded part up right there next to it. It's about 1/3 as long, and then you just blend the rest down into there. And that's for it kind of, that one, it's puffing out a little bit too much. So I'm going to come in here, maybe take a little bit off, and just redo. The lower lip especially is often easy to just, when you get it right, it just kind of falls into place. And so it can be really easy to just redo if you've got something funny with both of the lips. You know, take off the lower lip and redo it. So that's the lower lip. If you were going to do it smiling, then you put some teeth in between. You do it the same way. They just aren't. The lower lip isn't pushed up into the upper lip, and the upper lip is stretched out a little bit more, and then these would go wider, and a few more adjustments that way. So for the eyes, the same thing goes with the lids. You make those tapered coils, and so it's skinny at both ends. Get it a little bit wet. Maybe that was too much. So you've got the tapered coil here, and lay that across where the upper lid moves the most. So the lower lid stays put for the most part, so the upper lid's also going to arch a little bit more. This is where you want to get like your hook tool so that you can do some fine tuning and positioning, because your fingers might not be delicate enough. But you're just going to do that and then blend that upper side in. The eyelashes are made by the thickness of the eyelid, so it's the illusion of an eyelash. And then I use these rounded edges here to blend where I can't get my fingers to, and blend in there. There's also, depending on the eyes, depending on the age and nationality and several other factors, there's some folds in here where the eyelids come up and kind of fold in on themselves, and you can put those where they belong or add some more bulk in here. Older people have less flesh there, but it droops more, and then you've got whether there's like the puffy tissue in here with like the Asian eyes where the fold is all right next to the edge of the eyelid, and then the Western European, and where it's more down in here in this crease, and everything in between. All sorts of variety and interest that way, which is why it's really good to base it on yourself, so that you've got somebody to base it off of, to go for making it look human. And then the lower lid is going to be a little bit smaller. It's going to be flatter. And it's going to go right in here, kind of. That's too bulky. I think there's too much of a divot right there, so I think I'm going to fix my eye socket a little bit first. And then this is going to go right across here. Maybe open that eye just a little bit more. And push that part down a little bit more. Right in there. And you've got your lower lid. Now, the iris and pupil, in light eyes, you can see the difference between the iris and the pupil with dark eyes, dark brown to the black kind of that are really just dark brown eyes. You can't see the difference between an iris and a pupil unless you're looking very, very closely. What stands out more is the reflection off of the eye from whatever the light source is. Typically that comes up, the reflection is going to be distorted, and so if it's coming from above and distorted to wrap around, it makes kind of that triangle shape like that. And that gives it a sense of focus without it being, any particular part of the eye structure. But you put it generally where the pupil would go because it's right across the middle of where the glare hits the eye. And then you carve out, for a dark eye, you carve out everything else. So the iris is going to be kind of across here. So we're going to carve all of that out. And then, like I said, leave behind that little triangular, except it's more of a curved triangle thing. That's just kind of a neutral sort of light source from above. So when you look at people's actual eyes, you can see whatever the light source is, like you'll see bars in this room because of the lights coming across. You don't want to be that specific, so it kind of works in any room. But that generally creates the sense of an eye with giving it a sense of focus where the pupil kind of ought to be. Another way to make the eyes and the eyelids in general, as well as I'll show you a light eye, like blue eyes and stuff where you can see particularly like the lighter blue eyes, or if you want to show more of the detail and less of the shadowing of the eye, because you can still do that across, it's still appropriate to do that across a lighter eye, but you don't always need to when you've sculpted the pupils. Because it's just when you've carved that out, it lacks focus. It looks kind of hollow and empty. If you give it that little bit of, like I said, a sense of focus there, then it doesn't need that quite as much. So for this, I'm going to start just kind of carving in where the eye is going to go. And actually, usually I do this too over here. I'll go in and deepen the corners there so that the eyeball looks a little more round. But here, I'm going to go and push some of this clay down to make that eyelid. It's going to take a little more smoothing and whatnot. And I'll usually use some sort of a paintbrush, get it wet and brush across there to smooth that out after whatever tool I've used to make it in the first place. I'm going to go just a little bit lower there, try and get that, and then get just that the little tear duct thing right there, which after you hollow it out, then putting a little tiny blob back in there gives it that little structure thing that makes it look that much more realistic, even if people don't notice that amount of detail. We look at eyes and we recognize them, what's right or wrong with them pretty easily. The changes in people's expressions is very subtle in the eyes, and so even if we're not necessarily good at sculpting them, we're really good at recognizing them that way. This extra hollow spot up there is bugging me, so I'm just gonna fill in a little bit of that. So I'm gonna go kind of push up the clay there to build up that ridge. Now, if you're wanting it to look like, for a natural eye, without like any kind of makeup or whatever, you just have that edge. If you want it to look like it's got, like heavy mascara, heavy lashes, then you'd give just like a little bit, particularly out on this edge, you give it just a little bit of an extra, just on that outer edge, you give just like an extra little ridge there that's coming out, and that's gonna give that look. But I'm not gonna do much of that. So here I'm gonna go in and shape and round that eyeball. And then again, I'm going to touch that up with a paintbrush. Just get that, finish smoothing that out with a wet paintbrush. And then for here, I'm going to do the iris out, carved back just a little bit, but then have that come back forward. The outer edge of the iris is darker on like light blue eyes. There's a dark blue ring around the outside edge of the iris. It also clearly defines it, giving it that deep edge and then having it fade back up. How much texture you give it is, highly up to whatever you want it to look like. Typically you can't see from a distance anyway, you can't see much of the texture of eyes, mostly just the color, and it kind of fades together. The texture is really interesting, but not something you can necessarily see. And then I get one of these other tools that I make typically. You just want something like a pencil would work. Something with a sharpened point that you can stab in a ways. for the pupil. And when it comes to the focus of the eye, so you got that, and that makes the eye look kind of creepy. It makes it look extra light. You know, like the eyes are kind of whitish and the pupil is small. That also helps make it look creepy. Our pupils get bigger when we like what we see. And when we're feeling happy, and when we're angry or scared or don't like what we see, then our pupils get smaller. So we tend to associate small pupils with creepiness. It's also a bad sign on a blind date. So, you know, hopefully if their pupils go really tiny when they open the door, it's just because it's bright outside. If it's already nighttime, then you're in trouble. Then, you know, like, make it short. Text one of your friends and have them call you and tell you there's an emergency about 45 minutes in. Yeah. But making that pupil bigger makes it look a little more friendly, and carving that out more in general, which I'm going to end up closing off this pupil as I do this, and just because I'm going to, it makes me not worry about it as much if I just scoop it all out. So you have it go back a ways for, you know, a light colored eye, but you don't want it to look ghostly.
Like mine?
Your eyes don't look...
No, not my face.
Oh, like, yeah, the one you're sculpting? Yeah, those... Yeah, if you don't want it to look all creepy like Ender's. I'm like, yeah, your eyes aren't creepy. I don't know that anybody has much lighter than mine in the room. And I don't have particularly...
Some days.
I'm gonna go right now. I don't know why, but like when I looked at my eyes started watering.
And the other thing is, even though the iris is only on two sides, it's still going to fade up from like a circle. So have it fade up. You can also make it look a little bit less, you know, like creepy whitish by giving it some of that texture. And then just a suggestion of that texture, and then give it a nice big pupil. And that looks more like a light eye than a, you know, creepy ghostly one. It's still got some odd creep factor going on. Partly our eyelids usually cut across right around the top of our pupil. So enlarging that pupil and moving it up in relation to that a little bit. It's going to give it less of a creep out factor, right? Notice the difference there? So, that's eyes and mouth. The only other thing to do is hair. Hair is all about clumping.
Wait, clumping or clumping?
Clumps of hair.
I thought you said clumping.
So, for example, if I'm going to give this guy eyebrows, I'm going to lay just a fair bit of clay across where the eyebrows are going to go. And then, you know, if they're going to be old, spiky eyebrows, old people eyebrows that get all long, we'll leave it at long. You guys don't have to trim yours. Or I'll just be sitting there and pull one out, and I'm like, this is 1.5 inches long.
Ew.
Your time will come.
Hopefully not soon.
I think I found my first over an inch eyebrow hair when I was like 25, so it's not that far off.
Great. Makes me sad.
Of course, I did start going bald. Like, you could tell that I was thinning just a little bit in the back when I was 17, so. So you get the blob of clay on there, and then you kind of separate it into clumps. And then if you give those clumps just a touch of hair texture, it can, and then maybe tone that down just a little bit with some extra medium-sized ones. And that's going to be kind of eyebrow with hair. It's the same kind of a thing, especially, it's easier to do hair that's like, I don't know, wavy is probably the easiest hair to do. Or, you know, like braided or something. Frizzy is kind of hard to do. But like, you know, if you're gonna have like a big wave of hair coming down across there, put it on in a big chunk. And then that's gonna be like the part. Put another chunk on behind that to fill in some of that area here. And then it's all about big clumps of hair. And then as it comes back into here, they're gonna kind of fade in there and do another clump coming down across. Maybe a little bit further forward than that. I don't know, I haven't had hair on that part of my head for a while now. So, you get the clumps. Looks like I put the part too far over, so I can just kind of shift that. And again, just big clumps of hair coming across and a few clumps coming down there. And it's surprising how much just those clumps will do it. Then you add just a little bit of hair texture to it, soften up those clay chunks that have, where you can see the clay chunking up in the ways that clay does. And you've got, you know, hair. So there's that. And then the last thing we'll do is an ear, which will be separate from our head because we don't have enough of the side of the head to do it. And yeah, there we go.